This meeting is called to order. Welcome to the meeting of the Finance Investment Committee of the Vallecitos Water District for Monday, April 11th, 2022 at 11 a.m. at the district office. Seeing no public comment, I think we'll move right to the items for discussion. I'll turn it over to the general manager.
All right, thank you, Chair Elitharp. So we have 3 items on the agenda today. 2 are budget related and 1 is the cost of service study update. So the first item would be the capital budget, and then we'll look at preliminary salaries and benefits. I believe we sent out a packet over the weekend for your information. I'm going to turn it over to Wes in a second, but just as a reminder, our goal is to try to get the budget approved on June 1st. It's pretty aggressive, but that's our goal. We're having a little bit of problem with some of our May meetings because of some conferences and getting a quorum, but that's still our goal. So in combination with the Finance Committee meetings and then whatever board meetings we can get together, June 1st is our target date. We have problems as we get further into June. As you know, Wes and his fiancée are expecting a child, so he won't be around come end of May? May 28th. So we're hoping that baby will stay there until June 1st at least. But we don't control that, do we? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Wes, and we'll walk you through it. And any questions you have, we'd be happy to answer. So Wes, take it away.
Get read. Good morning, directors, and welcome to the 3rd Finance Committee meeting of fiscal year 2023. First one in person, though.
That's right.
Yeah.
I hope we still get to see the budget party slide, though.
Oh, it'll be here. It'll be here. I'm not on the screen, though, Jonathan. I don't know if we need to share it. Oh, I forgot about that. Where's my little share thing? So Zoom, share screen, and I'll share to this one. Okay. Now we're good. Okay. So it wasn't Jonathan's fault, it was mine. So yes, here we go. You've all seen this page before, and this will get us kicked off for this meeting. This should be an exciting meeting. We got a lot of materials. I sent out the email on Friday. There were 6 items attached to the email. Hopefully you got it all. There is a lot of information there, but again, this is all preliminary. It's draft. For the CIP especially, those are all the initial requests. So everything that we got from staff at this point, we put into the budget. From now, we'll be looking at what we're actually able to do, moving it around, taking it out. There'll be a lot of changes from now until you see the draft budget, I expect. But moving on to the agenda, first we'll talk about the background and go through a progress update. That's really just the budget calendar. After that, we'll go over the preliminary salaries and benefits. Then we'll review the capital budget requests. As I mentioned, those are the initial requests. I avoided saying if I'm going to avoid saying it, I'm not going to say it. Sausage making process. I said it. Next steps. After that, we'll talk about the next steps in the budget calendar. And finally, we have a guest presenter here. Mike Arthur is going to talk about the cost of service study update. We may even have a little surprise in the middle of the presentation that's not listed here. So, budget calendar. You've seen this twice before. On February 15th, we went over the budget calendar, and then we went through the budget versus actual for the last 5 years. At the second committee meeting on March 21st, we went over the operating budget requests. Again, those were the initial requests. We've now put those into the budget, and Ed and James helped discuss what those were and why we needed them. And then now we're at the April 11th meeting, and at this meeting we're going to be going over the capital budget requests. Ed, Jason, and James are here to discuss that. It's mostly Jason today, I think, on the capital items. And then we'll also go over the preliminary salaries and benefits, and then we may even look at the water cost estimates. So moving into the presentation, this is the preliminary salaries and benefits. This is one of the items that was sent to you on Friday. I sent you this slide because this is different than what's in the budget. We have some additional analysis on the right-hand side here, as you can see. And then I'm going to use my red pointer here, and hopefully it works out. So during rehearsal, the pointer caused a little bit of delays and freezing the computer, so let's hope that doesn't happen today. Keep your fingers crossed. But you can see at the top we have the A, B, C, D on the column labels, and then over here we have how each column was calculated, so the C minus B and C minus A, etc. So then looking at see, that's what happens. It just froze on me. Oh. So looking at the projected versus budget, so this is how we're doing so far this year. We took the 9 months of FY '22, projected it to the end of the year, and compared that to the fiscal year 2022 budget. So that projection, we're projected to come in at $250,000 under budget for salaries this fiscal year. The reason for that is we just had a lot of turnover, had several retirements, at least 4 that I know of for sure. So turnover, retirements, and then replacing positions at lower levels. Or in addition to that, the delay between hiring new people. So we always scrutinize every position, and that delay in scrutinizing a position and filling it results in salary savings. So then, next, total salaries and benefits is projected to come in at $688,000 under budget for the year. $250,000 out of salaries, the remainder is the $438,000 for the benefits, which is shown here. And the biggest part of the benefits is the group insurance is projected to be lower than budgeted. And that's really just because we thought we'd have a higher increase in the group insurance than we actually realized.
So what was the percentage increase?
So what happens is Kaiser, every 4 or 5 years, they spike up their rates and then they do nothing for like 3 years. We do a 5-year average. So that spike last year just caused us to raise it. It was around, I think, 5.3% last year that we thought it would come in at, and it didn't. It came in around Kaiser like 2.3 or something like that. So, or less, because they just didn't do anything after the big spike.
How about like Blue Cross? Is it similar?
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head. I do have a schedule of all of those increases, and I'm happy to share it with you. But I know the projection for this year, the highest increase we have for the 5-year average is 4.17%, and that's what we're using for our group insurance estimate this year.
Do we
Go
go
ahead.
out to bid for that every year, or no?
So-
Or we sign on for a certain number of years?
So Rondi actually handles that, but I do know that we're part of a JPIA, which is it's a joint powers.
Yep.
So it's really like, I don't believe we're paying any additional. I'm not sure we have the ability to go out and price it because we get government pricing.
Okay, so we do whatever JPIA, I think we've had that conversation.
Yeah,
a
we
couple
work through
times. Yep,
JPIA
yep.
for that, and we, as one of our tactical plan initiatives, I think it's next year, we will be looking at maybe going over to CSRMA or some other group as opposed to
Yep.
Aqua JPIA.
Thank you.
So then for the projected versus actual for 2021, again, the projection is coming in at $358,000 below the actual for 2021. Same reasons for that, just a lot of turnover, retirements, and replacing positions. And the total salaries and benefits is projected to be $623,000 under the actual for 2021. And $264,000 of that is the benefits, and the biggest reduction there is in the PERS. And that's really just a function of the reduced salaries and the paying the UAL. So sending in the $4 million to UAL reduced our payment required there. Next, we'll look at the budget versus budget. So budgeted for fiscal year 2023, we're actually budgeting an increase of $657,000 or 6.45%. So that amount includes a COLA in July. As you know, there's been a lot of inflation. The COLA is capped at 3% per the MOU. So we will be realizing a 3% COLA in July, and that's included in the budget. So that's 3% of the 6.45%, or about $385,000. And also we have normal steps. So we have about 47 people getting steps during this fiscal year that's budgeted. That's a little over $100,000, $110,000 or so. So those are the major changes that caused the $657,000 increase in budget. And total is only budgeted salaries and benefits is budgeted increase $689,000 or 4.32%. And all of that, just about all of it, is the salaries. The biggest increase in benefits is the PERS, and total benefits are only budgeted to increase by $32,000. So I did want to point out down bottom, we also show the authorized positions. So these are total authorized that we're able to fill during the year, and you can see they really haven't changed. This is just showing the last 2 years, but I don't believe the 108.75 has changed since 2020, I think, when we increased it to 108.75 with the asset management supervisor. I will talk more about the funded positions. I have a slide coming up in a couple slides. But first I wanted to go on to the director's salaries and benefits.
Before you do that, on the total authorized positions, do you have an idea of how many are vacant at this point in time?
Yeah, so right now we have, and actually I'll show it, we have 4 that are actually, we're filling 7 right now, but 3 of those 7 will be filled before the end of the fiscal year. So we're budgeting to have 3 of them or 4 of them empty starting at the beginning of next fiscal year, but they will be filled as well.
Sometime during the year.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the next slide, we're going to talk about director salaries and benefits. This was a slide that we started presenting last year at the request of Director Boyd Hodgson. So we'll continue to present on that to keep you updated. And I wanted to show you the projected versus budgeted for directors' salaries. And this is just what you're paid in salary, so this is just the $200 per diem. It doesn't include anything else. The projected versus budget is it's projected to come in at almost $20,000 over budget. And you can see that in 22, we budgeted $53,500. That was really low, and the reason for that is that we anticipated a COVID reduction. We didn't get the actual for 2021 until after the audit. Our projections for that would have been lower as well. After the audit, we realized that it's actually pretty much getting back to normal. The directors are getting per diem, so we're coming back to around 77,000, and that's not really outside what we've seen over the history. So that $20,000 is the projected increase. And in total, salaries and benefits are projected to be $15,000 higher than budget. For projected versus actual, projected is $4,100 lower than the actual from 2021. And total projected salaries and benefits are $5,400 less than the actual for 2021. Budget versus budget, we're looking at increasing the director's salaries by $27,500. And that's just to bring us back to the normal. You can see the budget's now $81,000 for fiscal year 2023, which is around what's normally spent for director's salaries. The projected this year is 73. Last year's actual was 77,000. And that's actually well below the maximum available to directors, so it's nothing abnormal.
Do you have an estimate of what the budget was pre-COVID?
Yep. Yeah, and I can actually give you I have history going back to pretty much whenever you
I
need.
mean, is,
Yeah, I was talking to Wes about that before the meeting started. I think we have to give the directors a longer-term view so that we can span the COVID era.
see what the effect of COVID was?
Yeah, so the 2 or 3 years associated with COVID impacts doesn't give a clear picture of what things were and where they were heading before COVID hit.
Okay.
And it wasn't a major change. So if I look back, and I can tell you that the budget was $53,500 for 22. Before that, we were around $70,000 almost every year. It'd be like $67,000, $71,000. That was typically what it was. It wasn't too far outside of that number.
Okay.
And Wes, before we get off salaries and benefits, I'm going to test your memory here. So how big of a slice of our entire budget pie are salaries and benefits, percentage-wise?
Yeah, so I have to combine water and sewer for that. So I have the graphs from water and sewer from the last presentation. I think salaries were 8% of water, something like that, maybe 8 or no.
I think it's 10 to 15% salaries and benefits combined.
Yeah, I have to, because I can kind of picture the graphs and I have water and sewer separated, so I
Yeah.
have to put them together to get.
Yeah, and the reason I bring it up is because on the previous slide, Wes showed that the overall salaries and benefits were going up around 4 or something percent. That's 4% of a slice that's only 15% of our budget.
Right.
So it's not like the whole budget's going to go up by that much. That slice will go up by that much.
Okay, so yeah, next. The total salaries and benefits for directors are budgeted to increase by $26,000. We expect a group insurance reduction of about $1,600 below last year's budget. So that's the salaries and benefits for the directors. If there are no questions, I'll move on. I'm going to talk about our salary initiatives and historical savings and staffing levels, unless there are questions. Okay, so moving on to one of my favorite slides, my colorful slide. This is salaries and benefits budget to actual for the last 5 years. And the bottom half shows the salaries budget to actual for the last 5 years. And the red is the budget and blue is the actual. And the top half shows the benefits budget to actual for the last 5 years. And the purpose is really just to show that we've done a good job, or the district has done well controlling the cost of salaries and benefits and kept them pretty steady over the last 5 years. And we've also been pretty accurate with our budgeting, and that we've typically been below 2.4% in variance. And last year with the projection, we may even realize a 4.3% savings budget to actual on salaries. So to do this, I want to look at kind of talk about the staffing levels as well. And you've seen this before, but I think it's important to note that back in 2016, we actually had 115.25 authorized positions in total. And you can see the top part of the chart shows the authorized and vacant. Those are the positions that were authorized but hadn't been filled for whatever reason. These are at June 30th, so it could have been just at that point, people had left and we just hadn't filled it yet. or we were scrutinizing the position to see if we wanted to fill it. But from 16 to 17, we were able to eliminate 3.5 positions. And that's just through efficiencies and other ways of saving and getting the work done. And then from 17 to 18, we're able to eliminate another 3 positions. Sorry, that's actually 4 positions. So that's 7.5 positions over 2 years that were eliminated, saving the district hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we've maintained it, we kept it there around 107.75 for the last 5 years, with the exception of 2020 when we actually added the asset management supervisor position. And that brought us to 108.75. And Director Elitharp in 2022, you can see at the end of this fiscal year, we have 3 positions that are going to be vacant and authorized. So those we're anticipating filling those, but at the end of as of the end of this year, they won't be filled.
Okay.
Next, so if there are no questions on salaries and benefits, I'll move on to the capital improvement program. And this is another one of the items that I sent you in the packet on Friday. This is actually one of the capital improvement pages. So every project has its own page, and there are somewhere around 80 to 90 of these pages. And they're all rolled up in what's in the CIP master that I sent out to you. That's sort of a table of contents for the capital improvement pages. And I just wanted to go through what the pages have in them, their content. So we can see, I got distracted. So we can see here at the top of the page is the project title. The next section is a description. It's what the project is and why it's needed. After that, we have the project manager, the project number, and over on the right-hand side, you can see the department requesting the project and the funding source for that project. This project happens to be 250, which is our reclaimed fund. If it were funded before, if it were water replacement, it would be Fund 110. If it were sewer replacement, it would be Fund 210. Water capacity and sewer capacity would be 120 and 220 respectively. And then the comments, this is just a full description of the project, what it's going to accomplish and why it's needed. A little bit more information. After that, we have the project spending plan. So this has the previously spent, if it's a carry forward project, the 5-year plan, and then the 10-year plan as well. You can see in the 26, 27, and thereafter gives us the funding after the 5-year plan. So we're able to do a 10-year projection in reserves with that number. And the bottom is finally the estimated project timeline. This is when the project was approved and when each phase of the project will be started and completed. So that's the full capital improvement budget page. After that, I'm going to move on to the CIP master, which is sort of, as I mentioned, the table of contents that summarizes all the projects. And this is a lot of numbers, and I probably can't read it at all. But I did break it out into 4 separate slides, so I'd make it a little bit bigger at least. And in doing that, I'd like to focus your attention to the top right here where it says carryover project. So
I just can you go back? I just have one question on, as you scope this out, fiscal year 2026, 27, and thereafter, do you ever factor in or guesstimate what the periodic maintenance costs will be, and does that go there or does that go somewhere else?
that goes somewhere else. The maintenance would be in the operating budget.
Okay, thank you.
So the CIP master, this shows the carryover projects, and carryover projects are projects that were budgeted for previously that have not been completed yet. So this is the list of those, and we can see, first I'd like to point out page 48 is actually where the page that was just presented, the MRF biological selector improvements. So that shows you where it is here in the table of contents. So if you were looking for that, you go to page 48 and just go across the line and see the details on that, flip to the page and vice versa. But in total, the previous budget and amendments, which is the amount previously budgeted for these carryover projects, was $66.7 million. And of that, the estimated to be spent by the end of this fiscal year, so we actually take what we spent to date, project it for the next 3 months, and get the total spent for this fiscal year. So we're saying that $12.7 million is expected to be spent by the end of this year. The difference between those two is the carry forward amount. That's the amount to be carried forward and spent in future years. And that's $53.9 million or $54 million. The next column shows the new request. So this might be any adjustments in cost to those projects, whether it be increases or decreases in the cost of the project. And we can see here the biggest new requests for fiscal year 2023 are the Tres Amigos waterline replacement of $3.5 million, the MRF conversion to sodium hypochlorite, and finally the Montiel lift station and force main replacement. And I've got Jason and James here today to talk about why those new requests are needed.
Okay. Just a question on the totals at the bottom. Is there one that indicates spent in the proposed budget?
Yes. So I'll move on to the 5-year spending after I talk about these.
Gotcha, okay, thanks.
Yeah, so real quick, the 3 projects that Wes has listed. So the Tres Amigos pipeline, if you're not familiar with that, it's a pipeline that was installed in about 1958. It's in the northern part of our district, up there off of East Vista Way. It's commonly referred to in the ops as the going through the strawberry fields, and it has a pretty significant legacy of breaks. So it's been on our radar to replace this for quite a long time. So the increase in costs that you're seeing right now, we're about 60% design. So we're expecting to finish that next fiscal year and actually get that into construction. The discrepancy is in the unit cost. So our engineer is assigning a very high unit cost for the replacement of this pipeline, much higher than what we projected. So it's a little bit of discussion with the engineer. Are they right? Are we right? Don't know, but for the budgeting purposes, we ended up going with the engineer's opinion. So.
Yeah, who's the engineer?
The engineer on this is NV5, and generally across the board for projects, we're seeing about a 30% increase, and as you know, it is the market, there are supply chain issues, I know that's a common phrase, but that is real, that's affecting costs, and we just have to deal with it or be strategic, and you know, will those prices come down, will they soften at all, can we play things? I don't know, that's sort of a bigger discussion.
Are we seeing that contractors are generally busier these days?
Yeah, they're also being very selective, but I will also tell you there's not a hard and fast guarantee. So we are seeing, there are projects where for instance, I will just say, had recently in a previous agency been out a lift station replacement project, and the prices were basically double than what had been budgeted. However, on a pipeline projects, we saw projects come in, the prices come in fairly normal. So this is a pipeline project, so I'm hoping that it's going to be more reasonable since it's not sort of a specialty, you know. But it's a bit of a guess sometimes what the market's going to do, and understanding that we're budgeting now, right, for a project we're actually not going to bid for another year. So everybody's crystal ball is a little fuzzy sometimes. And quite often, us engineers are a little bit behind the curve on what's going to happen. But we do our best, and we try to be conservative.
And Director Elbart, to also address your question, one of the major players here, a local contractor, Cass Construction, they're phasing out their public service portion and only doing private work. They have a backlog of private work, and they have existing public jobs that they're finishing up, and they still do emergency services. For example, we call on them when we have emergency work. But they're no longer bidding public contracts, and they're a huge player in the region, and also that means there's less players bidding on jobs.
And historically, they've done a lot of projects for Vallecitos.
Yeah, so for now, I'd say we're gonna stay the course. We're gonna continue to design and bring the plans up to 100%. We'll bid them, we'll put out the advertising, and then there's a decision point. If the bids come in really high, we'll have to figure out, do we want to go forward or do we want to readjust? But that'll be several months away on this project.
Yeah, and that's really the strategy is just really comparing this project and its schedule to the tactical plan, and do we need to stay the course, or is there ability to be flexible and adjust it? So maybe those construction dollars don't hit next fiscal year, maybe we position ourselves to have better numbers, better estimates, and actually budget for the following fiscal year to build it. So there's some strategy there and some flexibility that the staff has and the district has.
Yeah, and delays in construction obviously have an associated risk with them, right? We're replacing it for a reason, and that reason would exist for another year.
And generally prices don't go down, but we're hoping that what we're seeing is an anomaly spike, you know, so. The other, I think, project, is there any other questions on that particular project? I'll move on to the next one.
No, thank you.
So I think the other project is, sodium hypochlorite conversion. So of course, it's been on the books for quite a while. As you know, at the plant, we're using chlorine gas for disinfection per the regulatory standards, and we know that's an acute hazard. We're trying to remove that hazard and save the district not only the liability of having it there, but also the safety programs and staff time that has to support that. So we do see the board did just approve the professional agreement in October, and so that project has kicked off. I haven't dug too deep into why we're seeing this increase because I don't believe we actually have an estimate from the engineer yet. We're too early in the phase, other than maybe we're just seeing sort of, again, that 30% increase sort of across the board in construction costs. So I need to get with Ryan Morgan. He's not here today. And Wes loves to give me all these numbers right here at the end and say, put me under the microscope. But anyways, we're going to dig into this and find out. We also need to look at the scheduling of this project relative to the CCT expansion, which just came to the board last week, and really look at the timing of these two projects. I know Ed is very excited to move this project forward. It has been on the books for a long time, so.
Yeah, I think we'll all sleep easier once this project's done.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So we do want to move forward, but yeah, we're going to dig into these numbers and find out exactly why they're increasing. My guess is it's just the market right now. And then the other project we had is the Montiel Lift Station. So again, another project that's been on the books for a long time. This is a lift station out in the Escondido off of Nordal. Put this lift station in about 1985. It was a temporary situation. It became a permanent temporary situation. It's had multiple failure issues. It's been needing to be replaced for quite a long time. We're at 90% design. We're having some issues with the adjacent property owners as far as easements and development. So it's kind of slowed the progress of moving to that next phase of 100%, but we think we're close. So we may have to change gears a little bit in the scope, which is going to probably increase some of our design costs, but we think that that's going to be a better long-term solution for the project. And again, what you're seeing here in these increased costs is just the market. The engineer's estimate just increased. And again, there's a little bit of strategery is do we want to have those construction dollars hit next fiscal year, or can we slow this a little bit and position ourselves better? Again, I need to review the tactical plan and see what we are, but I believe this was on the list to get done.
It is, and there is actually some offsetting good news on this one. So Jason's absolutely right. We're having difficulty with our easements. It's constraining us. So it's going to increase our construction costs, because now instead of being able to spread out and spoil and stockpile, we'll have to do more things in a constrained space. But the offsetting cost is, one of the things we did is we extended our force main through the Nordal Shopping Center past our Costco easement. It's all pipelines that we have to replace anyway. So instead of replacing a 8-inch sewer with a 12-inch sewer that's 12 feet deep, now we're putting in a smaller force main at 4 or 5 feet deep, all through that Nordal Shopping Center, and that has increased the cost of this project. It doesn't offset the full 1.5 million, as Jason already mentioned, but it does have some offset due to that.
Yeah, and at 90% design, it's as close as we are. We do want to kind of push through and get this done, but we'll be looking at the schedule.
Well, how about we give you one more chance to give these flows to Escondido?
Oof, that hurt. That's
Hope upon hope that could happen, but it doesn't look good. So.
I think they're willing to, if we're willing to build their whole system for them.
Yeah.
Any other questions that you have on these three, or maybe any other that are on this list?
I don't have any.
No.
Okay, thank you.
So you might as well stay here. Okay, so moving on to the 5-year spending of the carryover project. So this is page 35 on the top right-hand side, and this shows the 5-year spending at the top here of those carryover projects. Same projects, just the spending over the next 5 and actually 10 years, but there's none out here in the 10-year plan. And looking at those, the total spending for fiscal year 2023 that's budgeted, and again, these are the initial requests. This is the first round at the first try at the budget. And again, not again, but just so you know, this shows the 5-year plan and the 10-year plan. But when we bring the budget to the board for approval in June, we'll only be asking for approval on a 1-year budget. So really the most important number here is the fiscal year 2023. And that is $28 million. And the biggest projects in 2023, and this, I'll make Jason the star of this again in a minute, are the Montiel Lift Station. He actually just talked about that. We're planning on spending $4.4 million in 2023. The City of San Marcos Creek projects, that's about $4 million. Then the Metal Arc Fail-Safe Rehabilitation Buena Reach, $3.6 million. The 16-inch emergency bypass pipeline rehab, $2.9 million. And the MRF conversion to sodium hypochlorite, which we just talked about, at $2.8 million. And I believe that's all of them. So I'll let Jason talk about if you have questions about the spending this year, or he can go into, I guess, the budgeted spending for fiscal year 2023.
Yeah, just a general question, the 28 million, how does that compare to recent years?
Last year, we were at 25, hold on, I had it here, 5 years spending. Last year, I have the total spending for at the bottom of the page, so I don't have just the carryover projects, but I will talk about the total spending once I show the new projects, and
Okay.
I'll explain the difference between the 2 years in full.
It's higher, I don't know the exact number though, but it is higher.
And I think it's fair to say that staff at this point recognizes that we probably can't deliver this amount. But these are preliminary requests and proposals, and we're gonna, go through this and probably move some of these out in outer years, just to realize that we don't have enough resources to get these out.
Absolutely. The Finance Committee gets to see the iterative process. So this is after staff has looked at each project individually, and now it's management to take a look at where our resources are and how do we adjust or modify to either meet the needs or push things back.
Yeah, and I think what we're also seeing is we're moving into the next fiscal year's several, sort of a construction-heavy fiscal year for the district. So that's why you're seeing a lot of these things. Like I said, the Montiel's at 90%. You just approved the M&D for the 16-inch bypass, so that's going to be bid out in the next couple months. So a lot of these construction dollars are hitting the budget next year. But as the Assistant General Manager said, we are going to be reviewing this and seeing what projects, based on capacity, can we move out, or just have to move out because we're just not going to have enough man hours to get this done. So it is an iterative process. We've already identified several projects that are going to get pushed a little bit to make this all work. So, but if you have any questions specifically about any projects, I can certainly get into them.
I don't.
And not to conflate two separate topics, but this big capital expenditure will start to draw down the reserves. We've seen really high reserves up near the ceiling, and we've anticipated over the last couple of years that we're going to not only paying down the PERS, but starting to do this heavy capital. So you'll start to see those reserve levels come down as we deliver some of these capital projects. The majority of these are being paid for as replacement projects through ratepayers, not developer projects.
How are you showing the Encina project effect?
So Encina has 2 portions to the budget. You'll see it on line 40 here. That's the 4th quarter payment for fiscal year 2022. And they should be coming in probably like $1 million left on the 4th quarter or so, based on what they budgeted previously. And then I'll also show the 5-year plan in the next slide, which is, these are the new projects. So you'll see Encina's here on the top line, this line 81 or page 81. That's their 5-year plan. So I'll talk more about how that relates to our total budget as well.
Okay.
So the next portion of the capital improvement, the CIP master, this is page 34 at the bottom. These are the new projects, and you'll see over here it says new projects. These are projects that weren't budgeted for previously that are being requested this year. So they've only got numbers in the new request column, and the total new request for this fiscal year is $73.7 million. And of that 73.7, 32.4 is for Encina, and 32.2 are for future projects. Future projects are projects that we are budgeting for prudent financial planning. They're not going to be worked on in fiscal year 2023, but we do plan on working on them in the future. So we've just summarized them into one project page and put them in the budget for planning purposes.
For the Encina, for the 32.4 million, how does that compare to recent history? Are we seeing spikes in their project totals?
It's actually about the same as last year. I believe it was about $32.1 million, so it's about the same as last year's budget for them. It has been coming up recently before that. I think the year before was in the mid to high 20s, but it's consistent with last year.
And can you explain for that line item, Encina Wastewater collects monies presumably from all of the agencies that it works with.
Yep.
What are some of the other, I guess the question is it comparable to what they're collecting from other similarly sized districts?
So we own, for capital purposes, 22.4% of Encina. So anything they spend
Okay.
on capital that we're responsible for, we have to pay 22.4% of what they spend. So there are 5 other agencies, and they pay the rest of the cost based on their ownership percentage.
The percentage, okay, thank you.
So then looking at this, so as I mentioned, of the 73.7, approximately 64.6 is Encina and the future projects. So the remaining, and actually for the district itself, we have 40 new project requests at $41.3 million. That includes the future. Last year, that number was 37 projects at $36.9 million. If you take away the future projects, we have 39 project requests for $9.1 million. Last year, that was 36 projects at $4.7 million, so it's an increase of about $4.4 million this year in new project requests. So then looking at the biggest new request this year is for a storage building and shop. And I did want to ask Ed Pedrazzi to sort of expand on why we... Oh, he's going to the podium.
All right.
Jason up.
Yeah, you gotta watch out for those
I know,
engineers.
right? So the project that Wes is talking about, I was gonna call him Mr. No Sleep Soon. Oh,
Sleep all
the
right.
new baby, yeah, no sleep. Which reminds me, Steve Klein, whose project this is, and the supervisor for maintenance services, he has a newborn that came to us on Friday.
Oh,
Little boy
fantastic.
named Walker, so.
Texas Ranger.
Yeah, right? So this building, Steve and I have been working together, coming up with the different projects. You've seen a lot of the maintenance projects, upgrade projects. The stairs out front is one of those. Things that we need to repair. This is actually something that we've needed for several years, and just now getting to move forward with it. So there's 4 different departments that this building will be for, 3 of them in O&M and 1 actually in finance, which is the meters department. And right now we have 2 of the C storage containers, the big metal containers you see on the ships. That's what's housing construction and the landscapers, so they each have 1. They're overfilled. They were meant to be temporary, like a lot of things. And we just get to the point where we need to have a shop. The electricians, we're kicking them out of their kind of a shop area to build the maintenance services offices, which is also a project that's in the budget. We did the design last year and hopefully go into construction in this next budget year to build the offices for Steve and his group. So we've had to move them out of that shop. So this would be a shop for the electricians, a shop for the construction crew to house their equipment. The landscapers would move theirs in as well, and then the meter department. And we've been talking about this for a while, they need to start doing meter testing and moving forward with a lot of their programs, including backflow and everything else. And so they'll move into that as well. So there'll be 4 different departments in there. The meter department will actually get to store their reading vehicle in there instead of it being in the warehouse, kind of in the warehouse. So there's a lot of use that's needed. We worked with engineering department with Ryan Morgan on getting an engineer's estimate. So that's what you see here going forward in the budget. If you walked out into the yard, the building would be right where the existing storage containers are now, just past where we keep the combination trucks, the Vectors. So happy to answer any questions on that.
So do we need to have an architect involved?
That's what the first year of 180,000 is, to design something for us. We'll go as low budget as we can, but at the same time we have standards we have to meet. Again, it will not be an office building, so there's less cost as far as the design and construction, but it'll still be a pretty significant shop area.
All right, thank you.
And it will be a permanent building?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
okay.
electrical, plumbing, everything.
Okay.
Thank you, Ed. So the next part of this slide that I wanted to point out is the total project cost. So this is the total 10-year spending plan included in the preliminary budget right now. And the total is $139.2 million. And for fiscal year 2022, that total was $134.5 million. So it was about a $4.7 million increase in the total 10-year plan from last year to this year. And the difference, we've talked about the increase in the total new projects of $4.4 million, the new requests such as the Tres Amigos 3.5, and the MRF sodium hypogeneration, or forgot the name of that one already, of $2 million. So that's the total 10-year. Now I'll look at the 5-year and 10-year spending for the new projects. So here's the 5-year spending for the new projects, and you can see I highlighted Encina at the top. That's because they are a large portion of our new project requests every year. Their total 5 years is $32.4 million as mentioned, but we can see that the total, we could see if it wasn't frozen again. I'm frozen. I can't even move the pointer right now, it's just frozen. Oh, there it goes. Okay. So the total new request, oh, it caught up to me.
Too many clicks.
The total new request was $73.7 million, and the fiscal year 2023 amount of that is $9.9 million. So that's just the spending in 2023, and important to note that that's what will be approved when we bring the budget to the board in June. And of that 9.9, 4.9 is for Encina, so about half of the total is just for Encina projects of the new requests. And you can see down bottom, Director Alatharp, the $37.9 million, that's the total budgeted spending for the fiscal year. Last year, I believe that was 24.5 or something like that, so it's like a $12.4 million increase from last year to this year.
I'm a little bit confused on the first column with numbers. It says new request for 22-23.
Yes.
Isn't that the 5-year?
Well, that's the amount being requested this year for, yes, the 5-year spending.
Okay.
Those are all just new projects this fiscal year that have been submitted. So that's the total CIP. Frozen again. And once the computer catches up to me, I will continue talking. Okay, so yes, I wanted to move on to the vehicles and equipment next, unless there are any other questions on the capital improvement program. So vehicles and equipment, this was another item sent out to you on Friday. It is a large list this year. We have a total just vehicles and mobile equipment requests, and this I've broken it down into 2 pages just so we could read it for the presentation purposes. And total vehicles and mobile equipment is budgeted at $1.9 million, about $2 million. But it's important to note that last year the vehicles and equipment budget was $662,000. And of that amount, due to supply shortages and we weren't able to get a lot of the vehicles, $533,000 is actually carrying over to this year.
Okay.
So even though the budget looks like it's 2.2, 533,000 is from last year's budget and it's just been carried over. And that's represented in these highlighted projects that are dated 2022 at the beginning. So
I know
all
that
of
I
the-
asked this last year as well. How are we thinking about potentially electrifying our fleet with the new availability of these particular models? Not immediately, but the new availability of these models as electric vehicles.
Yeah, so one of our current year tactical plan initiatives was to look at that, coming up with like a fleet master plan, and that Ed's has a draft of that, so Ed will address that issue.
Okay.
Yeah, as part of the strategic plan, and then one of the tactical plans that's in my group is to look at electrifying. We also have new regulations that are coming down from the state of California. They're not adopted yet, but it looks like they will, from CARB, California Air Resources Board. And part of that is starting in January 1st of 2024, 50% of our purchases for our fleet will need to be a zero emission vehicle. So that's either electric or a hydrogen fuel cell. Those are your only options. Aqua, the Association of California Water Agencies, is working with the state on this because, as you know, they don't make electric dump trucks yet. A lot of our big utility vehicles, they do have one manufacturer right now that is building trucks that are electric. But you can imagine if everybody in the state of California has to start doing this, that they're going to be overwhelmed. So it's very difficult. I am working with the general manager on this tactical plan initiative. I've put together a draft report on that. So in the meantime, we still have to replace with the most efficient we can, but we are looking at developing a full plan. So starting in 2024, the vehicles need to be replaced. The ones that are available, like Ford just came out this year with the F-150 Lightning,
I know.
but you can't buy it yet.
You can't get it yet.
No. So just like we're having a problem now with the regular vehicles because of the chip shortage and all of the supply issues. If we ordered the F-150 Lightning to replace some of these now, who knows when we would actually get it. So we're working on it though, and that will happen very soon.
Thank you.
And as I understand it, the new regulations apply to new vehicles purchased. It doesn't mean you have to take your existing fleet and automatically convert it, but when you do replace vehicles, ultimately then you have to comply with the new regulations.
That's correct. And by 2027, 100% of the vehicles purchased will have to be zero-emission vehicles. So it's moving very quickly, but unfortunately the infrastructure is not there to charge these vehicles yet. So that'll be working with engineering on building charging stations before we can actually purchase the vehicle. Otherwise, they'll just sit there and don't know what we'll do with them. Big paperweight.
Okay, so looking at thanks again, Ed.
Yep.
So looking at the total vehicles and mobile equipment for this year, I did want to point out the major, actually, I'm going to go back to that. I shouldn't have thanked him yet. I should have waited until after.
Yeah, I'm anxiously awaiting the Flushing trailer.
Yeah, so
Presentation.
some of the bigger purchases for 2023 are the no-des potable water main flushing trailer, and the other one is that one's the Freightliner M2106 dump truck, and I'll have Ed discuss those a little further.
Great.
The no-des flushing trailer, you may recall we had no-des down at Lake San Marcos about a year ago do some flushing for us, and they were using the trailer that we now have in the equipment budget for purchasing. So we paid them about $80,000, and they wound up completing 7.31 miles of flushing. And during that time, they actually, the sediment was pretty incredible. It was a little over half a ton of sediment in 7 miles. So about 200 pounds of sediment per mile going into it is on average what they found. And we have 380 miles of pipe. We got through 7 miles. Now they did it in 9 days, which is pretty good. And out of that 380 miles, we probably have about 300 that we'd be flushing that are distribution lines, not the main transmission lines. It's not what this is intended for. So if we break it down per mile, if we paid this company to take care of the 300 miles of pipe in a 5-year period, because that's what our flushing program is, it's almost $11,000 per mile. And by the time they would completely go through the 300 miles of pipe in our system, we're looking at over $3.2 million, and then we still don't have a piece of equipment to do it ourselves. And that does not include any of the labor from the Vallecitos employees, because we had 2 operators out there the whole time, all 9 days, working with them. So the general manager and I have been discussing this for a while to see if it was worthwhile. Was it Sweetwater that? Sweetwater paid them, it was $1.5 million, I think, to do this service for their smaller lines, of distribution lines. With the purchase of this piece of equipment, it basically is going to pay itself back in the 5 years that we're going to go through our system with it. And we'll have operators that are running it instead of outside people, so we save some money there as well. And general manager and I have talked about potentially looking at other neighboring agencies once we start doing this flushing, and see if they want to assist with some of the cost and maybe do a kind of a sharing thing with it. So we might.
What's the impact on labor?
There's only really just a traffic impact while we're doing it. So in Lake San Marcos, we had traffic control, and it's almost all residential area that this would be for. Our main transmission lines are running down the larger streets, but the smaller lines are.
As far as numbers of operators, you don't anticipate?
There was a request to include an additional operator, but I think that was denied for this year. We'll see how we do. We can pull from the other departments to help with traffic control, so we'll still use 2 operators to do the water quality and
See how it goes for a year or two?
yeah, and that's basically what we're thinking about with this. I think we'll be fine the first year, and then we'll see if we're able to get through a 1/5 of our system without adding staff. But right now, it makes fiscal sense to move forward with this purchase.
And is this purchase from the company that was doing the
Yes.
contract?
Yeah, they're the only game in town right now.
So
It's
is it-
basically a more mobile treatment plant.
Do they have a patent on it or something, or is it?
Just nobody else is making it. And I think most of the equipment you could buy off the shelf somewhere.
Put it together?
And it's pumps and filters and water quality monitoring equipment. It also has equipment where you can add chlorine. If your residual is down low, you can add
I
chlorine.
mean, would it be worthwhile to look at building our own?
Uh, we've tried stuff like that in the past.
I think you've got to volunteer.
Yeah, if we want it in 10 years from now, we just don't have the staff that can put something like this together. It's pretty elaborate.
Yeah, I think the old days of just flushing lines into the gutter and wasting the water are over. So we're really forced into technology like this, and it's really a decision whether we want to continue to contract it out or purchase it. And I think, like Ed was saying, the numbers, I think it's going to make sense for us to purchase
Is there
it.
any language in the drought, the various drought levels that prohibits that kind of flushing?
I haven't seen anything that outright prohibits it, but they're clearly clamping down on water loss, and things like flushing programs are a water loss that adds to your percentage of water loss. So, but I think in coming years, there will start to be that type of language that they will prohibit traditional flushing programs.
Yeah, SB 555 is the one that makes us do the water loss audit every year by October. And this certainly will help us reporting that back to the state. But there's a big public relations issue when we're in a drought, and you can't go out there and flush 20,000 gallons, down the curb and gutter when you're asking your customers not to water their lawn. And so it pretty much halts the flushing program.
Yeah, it's
Whenever
tough to
that's gone.
explain. Yeah.
It's real tough. It's just a black eye for the district.
One thing I really like about the flushing equipment is it lets you capture how much material is actually in the pipeline, because the old flushing, you didn't. It just, the water and the sediment just went down the curb and gutter, and this captures it, and you can weigh the filter and see how much material is in there. And then over time, you can get a picture to help you figure out how often should you be flushing lines. Right now, it's pretty arbitrary at 5 years, but if you can start to gather data that says, hey, you can go 10 years maybe and not have to flush as much because you're not accumulating the sediment.
Yeah, hopefully you can reduce the frequency.
Yeah, but right now, nobody really has data to point to argue something other than the 5-year mandated programs.
Right.
I think this makes good fiscal sense, and I appreciate that you brought the information forward, breaking it out if we didn't do this. I'm glad also that you were talking about potentially partnering with other agencies, because that was going to be my question. If there is only one game in town, and it looks like we're about to be part of that game, is it possible to lease the service out to other agencies? It might, it might bring in more income for our workers if they wanted to be a part of that. I don't know what the legalities of that are and the financials versus, what you'd already looked at with cost sharing. It might, be 6 in one hand, half dozen in the other. But just thinking about opportunities for our district and showcasing the service, and, that would also recover the money pretty quickly too.
Yep, it's definitely something that we've looked at and we'll continue to look at as we get some experience running this piece of equipment. They did 7 miles in 9 days, and our operators looked at that and said, we can do this. This is something we can do, and not pay all this money to someone else, because it really just comes down to $80,000 in labor is what we spent for 9 days with this company.
So do we know if any other agencies are buying this kind of equipment?
Not locally. I don't know of any in San Diego County that own one of these rigs right now, but up and down the state, there are definitely several agencies that have already purchased. They make a trailer mount and a truck mount, and we decided to go with the trailer mount. It's less costly, and we don't need another piece of equipment on top of the flushing equipment to try to maintain.
It gives you more flexibility on how to deploy it.
Yep, and we have plenty of trucks that can pull this.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so that was the vehicles and mobile equipment budget for fiscal year 2023. Now we'll look at the second half of that page, the bottom half, which is the facilities and equipment. And the total facilities and equipment being requested this year is $142,000. None of this is carryover, but the biggest piece or biggest item on the list is the MAR on-site bleach generation system, the replacement cells for $40,000. And Ed can talk a little bit about that as well.
So the on-site generation system at MAR has been up and running for several years now, and really the biggest ticket item of that system are the cells that generate the bleach itself. So as If you remember from one of the tours, the Twin Oaks Reservoir, you saw the on-site generation system up there where the salt water goes through each one of these cells and it gets a little stronger bleach as it goes through and releases the hydrogen gas and all that. So the MAR equipment, it runs almost 24/7, 365. We're introducing about 250 pounds of available chlorine each day of bleach into MAR Reservoir to combat the algae. The reason we're not bringing forward this same project for the Twin Oaks Reservoir facility is actually we use a lot less bleach at Twin Oaks Reservoir because we're not trying to kill algae, we're just adding supplemental chlorine to already clean drinking water. So the cost is pretty excessive. This is, I think, only 3 of the cells. We had to replace one of them under emergency earlier this year. And so we were able to kind of limp through hopefully until July to purchase the other 3 cells at that site, and that's the $40,000 you see here. So similar to a pump station where you're not going to replace the whole station, but you got to replace an electric motor. Well, that's what we're seeing here. So should get us through another 5 years though. It's been a really reliable system.
What's the dollar limit to qualify to get on this list? Is it like anything over 10,000?
$10,000 in more than 1 year.
Yep.
So it's just our capitalization threshold.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
Yep.
So then finally, the vehicles and equipment total request for fiscal year 2023 is $2.1 million. And as I mentioned, $533,000 of that is carryover from the previous fiscal year. So next up, we have a little addition, and I'm going to pass the mic over to Mike Arthur, and he's going to talk a little bit about our water sales and purchases projected for the upcoming fiscal year.
Just before you pass it over, and maybe I missed it, but is there a line item on fuel expenditures?
Yes, fuel is actually by department. So when you see the department budget, the water operations and sewer operations, at the bottom of some of those departments, you'll see fuel if they are using fuel.
So I'm thinking specifically gasoline to run the trucks.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
There is in the department expenses, so at the previous meeting, we went through the water and sewer operations.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at each department, if they have fuel, if they're purchasing it or using it, it'll be on there as a line item.
Okay, it's not consolidated anywhere.
It should be listed there on the total, and it's also in
Okay.
the materials and services.
Okay,
So
thank you.
the details are there.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so now on to Mike Arthur and the water sales and purchases.
Great, thank you, Wes. President Ellithart, Director Boyd Hodgson. First, it's great to be here in person, and I don't have to worry about mute, because even if this microphone's off, you can still hear me a little bit, so. So going over our projections for water sales and water costs for this year. As you may recall, last year we did our budget before we got the final rates from San Diego County Water Authority. Originally, we budgeted, I believe, somewhere around a 4.5% increase in our purchase water costs, and the actual cost came in, it was either 6.5 or 6.8. So we were already behind by the time we got the full numbers from the Water Authority. That might be the same case this year. With preliminary, they're working on some preliminary numbers right now, but they don't adopt their budget until mid-June, I believe. So we'll get some preliminary numbers from them, but historically, we haven't been able to rely on them. We are working on a team now, so we are working to get some more solid numbers earlier in the game. So I just wanted to let you know that we're doing that.
Can I ask a really basic question?
Yes.
You know, if this is something that we know is going to happen every year, that we're going to adopt our budget before they do, and that there's a possibility that we might miss the mark by a couple of percentage points, why don't we modify our process to so that we can be assured of and benchmark appropriately and accurately?
And we will be doing that in the new cost of service study, which I'm kind of jumping out of the budget, but into the cost of service study. But one of the things with the cost of service study that we plan to do a little bit differently is to do pass-through costs that will pass through specific line items directly from San Diego County Water Authority to the customers. And so when we get our rates in June, late May, early June from the Water Authority, they're rates that go into effect January. So there's a 6 months time delay. I mean, we're all hurry up and wait to get those numbers. So now with the process that I'm hoping will be is that we'll do preliminary numbers in the budget, but when we get the full rates in July, they won't affect the rates to the customer until January the next year, we'll already know those numbers. So, think I'll talk about it a little bit later when we do the cost of service study update.
Okay,
And
thank you.
if you still have questions, let me know at that
Okay,
time.
thank you.
So, for the projected water sales for this year, and I had the budget up because unfortunately, I didn't put the budget numbers in with here, which I should have done. But for budget for this fiscal year, we had water sales of about 31.1 million, and we're gonna come in right at budget for this year. For ready-to-serve charges, the budget number was 14.3, and we're projecting at about 14.6. And for pumping charges, the budget was 415,000, and we're projecting at about 402. A lot of the pumping charges we'll get into separately when we do the pump zone charges probably for January of 2023. But as you know, San Diego gas and electric charges are kind of going through the roof, kind of like gas prices. So we will do something to try to catch up on those rates for next calendar year. And then our total water costs, we had budgeted at 32.6 million, and it's gonna come in actually at 31.2. A lot of that is that part of it is we're buying, if you recall, we have water from OMWD that we get, and our contracted amount is at 2,750 acre feet, and we are purchasing a little bit more for this fiscal year from them. Also, our water sales are down about 5% this year, which is, so we're purchasing a little bit less water.
So the water costs, total water cost comparison, what's the quantity comparison?
I think we budgeted about 15,200 acre feet to purchase for this fiscal year, and we're gonna come in at about 14.9.
And so what's the preliminary quantity?
Oh, for next year?
Yeah,
I have that in a moment on another slide.
okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So for next year, then our budget, so we are going through a cost of service study, and I don't want to jump too much ahead on the cost of service study, but this does incorporate the potential new rates from the cost of service study. So for our preliminary for next fiscal year, the water sales, the actual commodity rate would be about the same. If you recall, there's really just a change in the allocation between tiers 3 and 2 for our proposed water rates. So the actual commodity costs in total will not change. There is going to be a little bit more, about a 1.5% increase in the ready-to-serve charges for next year. So that's where you see the 14.8. And the pumping cost recovery, we're preliminary estimating about a 5% increase, although that will be more determined when we review the pump zone charges. Right now, it's preliminary at 5%.
Okay, so they're gonna be, the pump zone charges, electric charges are gonna be brought up to current.
Well, we'll bring it to the board and whatever the board decides, so yes.
Right, but that you anticipate that's the plan?
Yes, and right now it is 5%, it's probably a little bit under, but for budget purposes, I wanted to be conservative on that. And then projected water costs, I mentioned that we don't get our actual water percentages until June, but we did put in an estimated last year. I think it came in at 6.4, it might have been 6.8, so I think this year I put in preliminary at 6.6. I'm hoping it's gonna come in a lot less than that, but again, I wanted to kind of be conservative and put in about a 6.6% increase on that.
And so typically, the Water Authority puts out what they call an all-in cost, which is an average increase, but each individual agency, each of their 24 member agencies, your actual mileage may vary, right? You're not on the average. So that's what Mike's talking about, the difference when they're budgeting to what we actually saw.
Yeah, so just to kind of close the loop on that, you know, the Water Authority got significant blowback last year on the inability to give us agency-specific numbers in a timely manner.
Yep.
And so I want to hear if you're hearing anything different with your meetings with the Water Authority.
So we're having a lot of meetings. They set up 20-something. 24 meetings. It's like every week there's a meeting, maybe more than one a week sometimes, so that they can start educating us and giving us more accurate information earlier on. I just don't know if it's gonna be, from a timeliness perspective, if it's gonna be any better than it was in the past. I
Yeah,
think we're
well, I mean,
still,
that was the intent of
That was
the
the intent.
rollback, was to change the,
yeah, because every one of the member agencies has the same fiscal year, right? They all are having it adopted by the end of June, so they need information as early as possible. And I think we're heading to the same problem we've had before.
the leadership at the water authority indicated they received,
Yeah.
message received, and they were
Yeah.
gonna make changes and make it different this
So I
year.
will say they're being more transparent, they're sharing more information, they're involving us more, they're going much more detailed calculations. I just don't know if it's going any faster,
Okay.
so.
Did all of the other agencies have a similar complaint?
Oh, yeah.
They
there
did,
was-
every one
yeah,
of them.
Very similar, yeah.
Because it's such a big driver for all of our budgets,
Yeah,
the
it's
purchase
60
water
to
cost.
75% of everybody's budget is the water authority's sales to us.
Yeah,
And I forgot what agency it was. Like they said last year, the all-in, they said was like 3.4, and one agency was double digits. So they got really hit.
That doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make any sense to me why there's clearly a problem and all of the customers for the water authority are having the same issue. And, you know, I asked, why don't we modify our process? But that was the wrong question, right? The right question is, why doesn't San Diego Water Authority modify their
Yeah,
process?
they indicated they were going to do that, so I want to hear if it's anything different than that, for sure.
yeah, so we've already attended maybe 3 of those meetings, and I guess I'll look to Mike and Wes if they think it's getting any better, but I'm appreciative of their efforts. I'm not convinced that we're gonna get a better number in a timely fashion.
Yeah, so far it's been more of like where they've been and where they're planning on going. It's just a lot of detail so far. There isn't a lot regarding the rates. But, and to add to that, most other agencies, I believe, I don't know of any others that are not on a fiscal year. So all of us approve our budget usually in June before the fiscal year begins in July, at least the majority of agencies. So that's why it's a common problem, because we all need the rates around that time to approve the budget, to incorporate it in the budget.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Having said that, if they think the average is 4% and ours ends up being 6%, that's only a 2% difference. So that's maybe a 600, with the quantities of water that we purchase, that's about a $600,000 difference. That's a big number, but in the scheme of things, when you talk about a 90-something million dollar budget, it's not a deal breaker for us. We would appreciate more timely, accurate information, but it doesn't cause us heartburn. We could be more conservative and we could say, hey, if they say it's gonna be 4, we're gonna say it's 6 for budgeting purposes.
Well, the good thing is, as you pointed out earlier, their rates don't go into effect till January 1st, so the impact isn't huge because our demands are kind of less by that time of the year anyway, so, I mean, we have some time to make adjustments, I guess, if it's significantly different.
Right. The good thing is that we're not setting our rates based on their preliminary numbers. We'll have
On-
concrete numbers by
On
then.
July 1.
Right.
Instead of, January 1st. So. I mean, the water authorities, they have a similar problem with Metropolitan. And so, they're,
Trickle.
they're getting numbers late from Metropolitan, so.
Okay, so the next slide is a breakdown of that water supply. And Director Ellerthart, you asked last year that we show the additional desal line, so I did that again this year.
Okay.
So we do have contracts with the first 2 line items to buy about 3,500 acre feet of desal water and 2,750 acre feet of OMWD untreated water in an exchange. And then I have preliminary per acre feet costs. And I do want to stress again that they are preliminary, and I think I put in about a 6.5 to 6.8% increase for those amounts. So our total commodity is about $27.8 million. And then they also charge us our fixed charges, our ready to serve and other fixed charges on that of about $5.8 million, for a total of $33.7-ish million, for a total supply of about 14,900 acre feet of water. I think that's the last slide I had on that. If there's any other questions, I'll be happy to.
And so what you're projecting is actuals for this year? Wasn't that about the same, 14.9?
Yeah, it's about 14.8, about 14.8 to 14.9. Yeah, I'm being conservative again there too. We did see, if you remember when we did our COVID updates and things like that, we didn't see too much of a overall demand change. It was just from what to what, from commercial industrial to residential. So we do a very intricate, again, I'll plug my 270,000 lines of data. We take all the lines of data from every single customer every single month and kind of plug it into a formula for next year.
I went yellow. So next, we're just going to go on to the next steps in the budget process, which is just continuing on with the budget calendar. And I think we mentioned that in May, well, let's say first, now that we have all the operating expenses, the salaries and benefits, and the CIP projections, once we've actually finalized those, revised and refined them, we'll put them into the budget and start to do the reserve projections for the next 5 and the 10 years. And that's at the end of the budget where you see the actual reserves and the projections we do. We'll put that into a draft proposed budget, and we'll, again, revise and refine it, and we'll bring that to the board at a full board workshop on May 5th. And from that meeting, after we've gone through any board requested items or changes, we'll further revise it and hopefully bring a nice proposed budget to the May 18th board workshop, which will be the second time you'll see this. So fortunately / unfortunately, you'll get to see it, pretty much the same presentation probably 3 times. At the 18th, and then again on June 1st, when we hope to have the recommended budget to the board, hopefully for approval. And that's the budget calendar.
Wes, can you go back one slide? And I'm going to give you a heads up. I'm going to be asking you a question in a second. So this May 5th board workshop, I know we were having concerns about a quorum on the May 4th board meeting. Do you know if the directors who are attending that conference will be back for a May 5th workshop?
I think they come back very late, like 8 o'clock at night.
On the 5th?
Yeah, if I remember
I
right.
think that's right, yeah.
8:30, something like that.
Yeah, so we're probably going to have to reschedule this date, whether we make it the next day, which would be a Friday, which is usually challenging for people, or if we just go to the following week. But I'll be reaching out to the directors to schedule this workshop.
As long as it's before May 28th.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the end of the budget presentation for today. The next item on the agenda is the cost of service study update, and that's going to be Mike Arthur, unless you have any other questions for me.
I don't think so.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
Thanks, Wes. So I already touched on a couple of things about the cost of service update. As you know, for probably the past 18 months, we've been working with a consultant to update our cost of service study. And there's a couple of things in the cost of service study that we're looking to do a little bit differently. We've mentioned one of them is the pass-through rates from the Water Authority. So many agencies are now going through that if the Water Authority puts through a 5% increase on the certain line items, that the specific line item on our bill would go up the same amount, the 5%. And then we would do some kind of either CPI or actual cost increases for the VWD internal cost that's on that line item also. I'll go through that in the chart in a minute. We're also looking at doing a 5-year rate increase. So the Prop 218 would be for a 5-year period. And we're also looking for some drought rates. There's that, I think it was Ordinance 219, I'll get into that in a second too, the drought rate ordinance, and I'll get to that in a minute.
Just a general question on that. Are we gonna have a look at rate increase discussion during the budget approval process, or is this really separate from that?
It's separate. It's got its own timeline and its own path, but obviously they're related.
Yeah, I guess philosophically, to me, it's kind of hard to ask our board to approve a budget if they don't know what the impacts are to rates, so.
The one part of the line item, and we'll get to this in a second. Actually, if we can table your question,
Sure.
and maybe we'll get to it in a second.
Okay.
In a second. So I just want to go over quick the timeline. So in 2021, we had both a finance committee and a board workshop, and then today, Today, we're having a finance committee to kind of give an update on the cost of service study. There's some timelines, deadlines that we have to follow in order to follow a schedule. So what I put on here is just a tentative, 1 month from now, we'll have a board workshop on the rates. And then the notice of public hearing will be mailed out a day or 2 days later. And then from that point, there's a 45-day notice. So you can't adopt rates or have the final hearing on that until 45 days after the notice goes out. So if these dates get pushed back or up a week, everything else would kind of dominoes fall on that. So then rates could go into effect the next day, and it wouldn't affect bills because that go out until the next month. So that's the timeline.
So for our first proposed rate increase, it's for July 7th.
Yeah, July 7th.
Okay,
That looks like the time-wise it would work out.
okay.
And then it would the subsequent year ones would probably be January 1 of
January
the
1.
following years. So,
Okay.
but then we'd be on a cycle where it'd be every January 1.
And at this point, it would be 27 months, I believe, since our last rate change. I think it was 2020, March of 2020.
So didn't we do a 2-year the last time?
It was just a 1 year. It was just a 1 year. It's set rates, and then those rates stay in effect forever until you change them.
I thought we did a multi-year.
That was back, I think, in 2017. We did a 2-year one that got us through the 19.
That's what I'm thinking.
And then we did an update. We had a consultant do an addendum, and we did an update on March 2020, I believe was the last time we did that. And during that time, we talked about the 6.8% increase from Seneca County Water Authority. I think the year before that was around 4%. So in that time frame, in those 2 years, we've had about an 11%-ish increase in our cost of purchase water, and yet we held our rates stable.
And if I could just add to that too, so this, what we're proposing here is still based on the 2022 budget, so that's built into this cost of service study. If the board approves a 5-year rate increase, which will have caps for the next 5 years, those will be based on future budgets. So when we approve the budget in June, that'll have the revenue requirement going forward, and that'll be used to determine the rates for January of the following year.
And so those future ones will be zero to the capped amount,
Yes,
anywhere from 0 to.
that's correct.
And I'll show you in the next slide, it kind of breaks it down by line item. It's gonna be a little confusing, so I'll go kind of slow on it. And to me, it makes sense, but I'm a financial analyst, so I'm hoping, you guys ask the proper questions and slow me down if it.
So just to get back to my first question, this first new rates in effect of July, we'll have time during this budget process to consider that.
Well, if you look here, we have to mail the notice of public hearing on May 12th for this one. So this is actually setting the rates that should have kind of been set in January of 2022. So this is catching up for that. And then once we've got that, it'll also have the 5-year sort of caps going forward. And we'll approve the budget in June, and then as we look at it towards January, we'll use the budget that's approved in June for that revenue requirement for the January rate increase.
Yeah, but I think the important thing is, and you're exactly right, President Elitharp, you're setting the cap. So when you go through the Prop 218 process, it says here's how high you could set it. If your actual experience says you want to set it lower, you can do that without having to go back out and do a 218. You can't go higher than you set in 218, but you can go lower.
Yeah, I guess I'm just concerned with my fellow board members being able to say, you know what, I don't agree with an X% rate increase here in July. Can we go back and look at using more reserves and offsetting some of that? I mean, potentially that's what I can imagine might happen, so.
Yeah, and we can be prepared to show the long-term consequences of doing that, but it is an option for the board.
Okay.
And we talked about that real quick, I think in the finance committee, the board workshop on 12/15, and I'll make up some numbers just to make it easy. If your rate should have been $90 total all in for a water customer, and you set it at 88 using $2 as reserves, and then, so it really should be 90, and next year, let's say it should be 92. if you artificially set it at 88, it's gonna look like it jumped from 88 to 92. So just to keep that in mind, that
Absolutely.
it's gonna look like a double jump.
That's the downside.
That
of
is
using
definitely the downside.
Reserves, yep.
Yeah.
Or you're gonna keep it $2 below where it should be, and you'll continuously, every year, draw in reserves.
No, I understand that.
Okay, so again, a lot of numbers here. So what I want you to focus on, so this is the fixed ready to serve. Our bills are comprised of two amounts, the fixed charge and the commodity charge, which is a variable. So first we're gonna look at the fixed ready to serve charges. Our current charge, and about 88% of our customers are the 5/8 3/4, so we're gonna kind of focus on that. Everything else is just kind of prorated based on meter size. So our current rate for our ready to serve is $36.55, projected to go up to $37.08. So that's a 53-cent increase, or about a 1.5% increase. And I told you it's kind of prorated across the board. So all the ready to serve charges we're projecting to go up about 1.5. It says 1.6 on some of them. That's just a rounding thing. So it's about 1.5% increase on our fixed ready to serve charges. Oh, what I wanted to show you, and I don't know if I'm gonna have luck with the, isn't it right click or something to get the, yeah, that's that one. So hopefully we can have this work out. Okay, so you'll see that 3655 is what's currently shows on the customer's bill. It's not segregated into what portion is VWD, what portion is the San Diego County Water Authority IAC, the infrastructure access charge, and what portion is the remainder of the San Diego County Water Authority fixed charges. So what we're proposing to do is actually spell those out into three components. So there'd be a San Diego County Water Authority pass-through amount, which is estimated about $10.31, well, which is $10.31 right now. The San Diego County Water Authority IAC infrastructure access charge, which is a charge per meter equivalent size of $4.24. And the remainder, and let me go back a slide so the circle's not on there. Oops. Oh, okay. The remainder is the VWD portion. That's the meters and billing and all other general administrative and everything else that is captured into there as a fixed charge. So the total, so the total increase, like again, as I mentioned, would be about 53 cents or 1.5%. So in the future, what would happen is the top two lines, we've talked about the pass-through, if the Water Authority pass-through is 5% for fixed charges, these two lines would go up by the 5%. So in roughly 5% of $14.70. The VWD meter and billing line will go up by however we set it in our study. So we could set a cap of like 4%. We could set our actual cost not to exceed 4%, something like that. So we could know what the VWD internal portion part of the bill would be for the next 5 years.
Is that the commodity?
This portion, we'll do that with commodity too, and that'll be the next slide, but this is the fixed charges. This one's the fixed charges. Out of the $37 projected for the bill,
Right.
about $22 is the VWD fixed portion of that.
Oh, I get you. Okay, so it's between us and the water.
Yeah, so here's where it kind of gets confusing, is because the top two line items would have one cost inflator, and that's directly from the Water Authority. And then the bottom line would be our internal ones. Well, we kind of know setting the budget that it's 4.2% this year, and it's going to be 3.9% the following year, because we do a 5-year budget projection in there, and we have those delineated out. But what you could also do is set a cap. VWD internal costs not to exceed 4%, not to exceed 5%. You kind of want to be a little conservative on that. The OMWD did theirs, and they set a cap, and it went up more than the cap, so they had to kind of eat it through reserves. So that's the fixed portion of it. So now we'll go over the commodity portion. It's going to kind of follow the same thing, where currently our tier rates are $3.77 for tier 1, $4.75 for tier 2, and $9.18 for tier 3. And again, on a customer's bill, it just shows one line item, commodity tier 1, $3.77. So now the plan would be to show the actual line items, the VWD, let me go in order. The San Diego County Water Authority portion of it the VWD our internal variable costs, and then discretionary offsets. I'll get to that in a second, but that's basically the property tax and the RDA revenue offsets. I'll talk about that in a second, though. So again, then, when we met in November, December, we talked about keeping tier 1 rate the same at $377. So that's what this cost of service study does. The tier 2 rate would go from $475 to $490. And again, these are pretty solid numbers, but still a little preliminary. They could change by a penny or two. And then the tier 3 would actually come down from $918 to $851. And again, to reiterate why that is currently the cost of desal is fully burdened on the tier 3 rates. But desal is really a supply reliability issue that benefits all customers. So the cost of service study then blends all the costs of our supply across all the tiers. So that's why the tier 3 is coming down a little bit.
I'm a little bit confused. How do you come up with the water authority's figure? Is that a residual of?
The water authority, the pass-through amount.
Yeah.
So that is their, if it's $1,800 per acre foot, it's 1,800 divided by, what would it be, 435.6?
Yeah.
It's basically kind of
The number of units per acre foot, you're just.
Okay, just on their wholesale.
yeah, on their wholesale cost, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's why you'll see it's the same tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. It's the San Diego County Water Authority. Now this also includes desal, so it's all combined into one. So it's not just, and that's, if you remember when
But
Wes was.
it's not our desal. It's just the water authorities.
No, it's our desal. So if you remember that chart that had the 4 lines, the desal, OMWD, VWD, and additional desal?
Yeah.
It's all those costs divided by, in this case, that 14,897 acre feet,
Okay.
divided by 435.6 to get to a per unit cost.
Now, the water authority's commodity rate does include their portion of desal. So they're taking in some desal, it gets factored in.
5% or whatever.
Yeah, and then we have to factor in our direct desal purchases for all these.
Is there desal from the Carlsbad desal?
Yeah.
Yep.
Same source.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's all in there.
So again, when we talk about the 5-year forecast, the first line would be indexed by whatever the water authority's pass-through amount is. So like last year, if this was in effect, they told us originally 3.5, it came in at 6.8. Well, January the next year, the 6.8% would be applied to this top line item. The VWD internal supply costs, just like I mentioned as the fixed portion of it, whatever our internal costs are, and we could set a limit on that, our internal cost, maximum 4% or whatever, 4.5%, whatever the board would like to do on that line item. And I'm going to get rid of the circle for a second. The discretionary offsets are, prior to this cost of service study, are 1.8 million, and I might be off by a couple $100,000, but we get about $1.8 million in property tax revenue and another million or so in RDA revenue. So that, I'll just call it $2.5 million just for ease. That $2.5 million is a offset of revenue requirement that when it funnels through the sausage making, and I know Wes didn't want to use that word earlier, but when it funnels through, it benefited everything. So it came off the revenue requirement, and when it goes through basically the Excel spreadsheet to come out, everyone benefited, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, ready to serve costs. In talking with our legal advisors, you are able to use discretionary revenue, such as the property tax and RDA, to offset specific classes, tiers, whatever, fixed costs, variable costs.
The RDA is what?
Redevelopment, it's kind of like a property tax, it's a redevelopment agencies. They're still, even though redevelopments are abandoned, there's still revenues coming in for those for the next 20 years or so.
So our property tax revenues, is that $10 fixed charge it's separate from that?
No, this is part of the 2% that, of the property tax that each homeowner pays. A portion of that is carved out for special districts.
So is that $10 charge that goes to VW?
That goes to San Diego County Water Authority, I believe. That $10 charge that's on your property tax bill, that is a fixed charge that the water authority puts on your tax bill.
Right.
But there's two of them though. I think there's a water authority, isn't it?
Yeah, there might be a metropolitan bond one that's on your tax bill too.
Maybe I'm mixing up.
Yeah, but because the water authority puts those on your tax bill, if they didn't put it on your tax bill, it would flow through their analysis, and then it would affect our rates, would then affect the end customer's rates. And I mentioned last year too, when we do water rate comparisons now, it's going to become a little bit more difficult because some agencies are now putting a portion of their charges directly on the property tax bill. So it's not really transparent when you look at their rate sheet how much that is. Another thing I'll mention real quick is when we do the rate comparisons too, is that BWD, when we got that metropolitan lawsuit money, we elected to refund that money directly back to the customer. A lot of agencies are using that money to offset rates, and kind of like we talked about using reserves, it's kind of misleading in a sense because it's a temporary reduction. For example, OMWD is doing a 6.9% credit on your bill. So if your rate was supposed to be $4.06, they'll show a negative 6.09 cents or 6.9 cents as a credit. So when we do a comparison, comparing to different agencies, their rates will look artificially low. So that's just another thing to keep in mind. I'm going to try to asterisk those that are using offsets. So when you see our rates compared to OMWD, for example, it's not a true rate comparison. And I think I have a slide on that.
And almost every other agency did that exact thing. They
Right.
all applied it towards future water purchase costs. Some applied it to the CIP or a particular project, but most of them just gave a credit to the water purchase.
Right, and some are doing it over a 1 year period, 2 year period, and one's doing it over a 5 year period. Okay, so then the overall bill, okay, so taking the fixed costs and the commodity costs, how does that affect our typical single-family residence? And again, we define our typical single-family residence as a 5/8 inch meter using 13 units of water per month. 13 units, we use that one because that 2 years ago when we did a study, the average customer, our average 5/8 inch customer used 12.8 units of water a month. Actually, it was 3 years ago. Now it's more towards 11.9. So if I were to do it now, I would do 12, but for consistency's sake, so we can compare the last 5 years, we're gonna use 13, and we're probably gonna use 13 for the next foreseeable future when we do comparisons. So our current single-family residents, and this is water only, it's not including sewer, their typical bill would be $92.42 with 13 units of use. Projected is about $94, and again, this will probably change by probably no more than a nickel either way when we finalize our cost of service study. Oops, sorry. So the total customer bill would increase about $1.58 per month. And again, this is over 27 months since the last adjustment. So overall increase to their bill, of 1.7%. And the last time when we saw this in December, I believe, I think it was about 2%. We were able to come down a few pennies on this. Okay, so are there any questions there? I'm going to go into drought rates next.
Any questions?
So Mike, can you hazard a guess, if you looked at the typical customer that's both a water and a sewer customer, and if the sewer bill's not going up at all, that's gonna mitigate this 1.7%. What's your guess of what the typical?
Right, so we have about 95% of our customers are both water and sewers, probably 96%. So the majority of our customers are water and sewer. We have some that are just water and some that are just sewer. So if you add in the sewer portion of this bill, which is about $39, $38.99, the overall impact is 1.2%. I've already calculated that.
Okay.
So their overall bill, again, over a 2-year period, when our purchased water rates have gone up about 11%, the typical customer will see about a 1.2% increase.
Yeah, that's a pretty good story to
Yeah,
tell.
very good story, especially I was kind of amazed, and I think I have a rate comparison sheet that I'll show you in a second. especially considering that a third, a quarter of our water is desal water. So, it's a pretty good story. I want to say, oh yeah, I do have it, okay. So real quick, the other thing that we wanted to add is the drought rates. Obviously, that's a hot topic right now. So in November of last year, we passed the Ordinance 219, which was the district's water shortage contingency plan. And part of that had a discussion about drought rates. So Chris put this together for me real quick. And these amounts are subject to change a little bit. These are just preliminary in notice. So real quick, level 1 is just a drought watch. So there's no drought rates that are in effect. A level 2 and 3 are drought alerts. And so what would happen if, when we do the budget and I show you the water sales, I usually do a high, kind of high-low. What would happen if there was a 10% reduction? What would happen if there was a 10% increase in water sales? And what net effect that would have on the district? So if there's a 10% or 20, in this case, I think it's 20 to 30%. There's a 20 to 30, you know what, I'm gonna actually bring it down. So let's see if this pointer's still working. Okay, so if there's a 20 to 30% reduction in customer demand, what would happen is we're projected to sell 6.1 million units of water for the fiscal year. If there was a 20 to 30% reduction, our units of water would decrease to about 4.3 million. So our revenue loss would be almost $11 million. Now, there's not a dollar for dollar decrease in our expenditures. Our expenditures savings would only be about $6.9 million. So the net effect on the district's reserves would be about $4 million. So if you take that $4 million, and I should have done the kind of like Wes did, column A, B, C, and D. But if you take this $4 million and divide it by the 4.3 million acre feet, if we wanted to recover that money and not hit reserves, it'd be about 90 cents per acre foot, 90 cents per unit that we'd have to charge customers in addition to their regular rates.
That's every unit.
Every unit of water, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, yeah.
Okay.
So that's if a level 2, 3 drought was called into effect. And again, the same process for level 4, 5, and the level 6. So level 4, 5, just real quick, it's a 40 to 50% decrease. If there was a 50% decrease, obviously our water demand goes in half. If we get to that point, we're in real trouble. But the revenue loss would be about 17 million. Our expenditure savings would be about 11.5 million for a net of $5.7 million impact to the budget. And so that's the numerator. The denominator is getting smaller. So what happens when you divide a number with a smaller denominator? Well, the resulting number is going to go up. And again, if I'm speaking math geek, please stop me. So in that case, the drought rate would be about $1.84, and the same with a 6. If we're at a 60% cutback, we're probably in big trouble.
So this level 2, you know, we are about to vote on whether or not we go to level 2. And looking at the proposed 90 cents per unit increase across the board to our customers once we implement level 2, when would those new rates take effect?
That'd be at board discretion, and Glenn, correct me if I'm wrong, or if you want to take this.
Yeah, so we don't currently have drought rates. So if we made the decision to go to drought level 2, we don't have the ability to automatically increase our rates. So that's kind of a separate action, but going to level 2 could set up some mandatory restrictions on customer usage and what's allowable, what's not allowable. So a separate action would be required.
So in this ordinance 219, this isn't spelled out?
I don't believe the current one has the drought rates in it.
It talks about drought rates, but we don't have drought rates in effect. For some reason, about 4 or 5 years ago, we used to have drought rates, but when we did our internal study, 2017, the drought rates were dropped.
Do we have the ability to be selective on the tiers? I mean, could we charge a higher amount on like 2 and 3 and not on 1?
You probably could, but you'd run the risk of a challenge of how you apportion it. I don't know that the state has determined a particular way that you should apply your drought rates. It's typically included in your cost of service study, the methodology that you would use, and that would be your document that you'd use to defend yourself.
Yeah, I guess philosophically, it's, you know, you get into higher tiers, it's more discretionary use of water. And so to me, that ought to be penalized more than tier one. I mean,
Yeah.
tier one is kind of considered indoor, base,
Essential use.
base essential indoor use. I don't know if we have the ability to modify that or not.
Yeah.
I would support an exploration of that.
What's that?
I would support an exploration of that.
Yeah,
I think it's also something that we have to think about. If we do go forward with implementing drought rates, then we will have what will be perceived as rate increases by our customers in very rapid succession. And we can message as much as we want to that the rate, that the water has gone up 11% and we haven't raised rates for 2 years. But in actuality, the customers, some of whom, given the growth in San Marcos, weren't even here 2 years ago, that's not going to resonate with them if we charge them 90 cents more per unit very soon, and then we raise the rates again in January. So I think that that's something we have to, that's the reality of the situation, irrespective of the technicality of the context.
an increase is an increase,
Right.
That's right.
no matter what it's due to.
Yeah, that's right.
And real quick, just one of the, for the tier one, tier two, tier three, doing a separate rate, if we were to get to like a 40% cutback, most of our tier three usage would go down. So your denominator is basically zero.
Yeah.
So there's really, so that's why it's determined to do it this way. It's a much easier, cleaner way to do it, but we could certainly look into that.
Yeah, I think there's a philosophical question as to
Right.
whether it should be equally applied amongst all the tiers.
Let's see. Okay, so we mentioned earlier kind of doing a rate study, not a rate study, a rate survey of our neighboring agencies, and we do this each time we go out for Prop 218. So here's a up-to-date, I just did this last week of a rate survey of our neighboring agencies, and again, this is using a single-family resident 5/8 meter using 13 units of water per month. So the range for the 23-ish, 24-ish, I don't know how many agencies are here, is from a low of $74, $75 to a high of $145. VWD with their proposed rates that we mentioned are $94, so we're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the sixth lowest.
So are all the others proposed?
No, all the other ones I went into
Are
each
existing.
individual individual rate sheet and pull those out. Now, for example, like I was saying for OMWD, I didn't put their dollar amount here, but it's $106, let's say. But that is net of that 6.9% offset. So if you take 7 cents times 13 units, that's 91 cents. So you'd have to add almost $1 to their rates to kind of make it an apples to
So
apples.
some of them are gonna look artificially low. because of
Yeah,
that.
so that's what I'm saying, and then some of them put them on the property tax bill, I don't have those numbers here, so these are what's on their rate sheet as stated. And I looked at the last update, so I did this last week, May 6th, so I got their most current rates that are in effect.
This is a great story because this is our proposed versus everybody else's
Right.
existing.
And in addition to that, I put on here just, we're currently at 92.42, so I think we probably were below Oceanside
Yeah.
by a couple pennies, so we only jumped leap one from fifth to sixth or fourth to fifth, or however that turns out to be. And it's also a great story, like I mentioned, that how a quarter of our supply is desal. That's remarkable that Carlsbad and VWD
What?
are in the bottom quarter.
I had to respond to a fellow water authority director about this, and he said, how can you stand to buy that water that's so expensive? I said, we're still in the bottom, even a quarter of our supply, we're still way down the list here.
Right, and that's an amazing story. I was amazed when I did this. It didn't, when you think about it, it doesn't really compute when you try to do it, the math in your head. It's like, no, there's no way that we could be in the bottom fourth, but.
I think Vallecitos has the most expensive blended imported water cost of any agency,
Yeah, it's
and we're
just
still
a
able to do
great
this.
story to tell our customers.
So what is the reasoning? What is the reasoning behind why it's so low, given the expensive blended water rate?
Part of it, I would say, is great management, and some of them are the great decisions that we did. Seriously, I mean, management, including the board, a lot of it is paying off that UAL, is our costs have come down a lot. So that reflects in the water rates and just being prudent fiscal management.
Yeah, cost controlling and the initiatives that we've taken over the years to save money, basically. If you have lower costs, lower rates.
And I believe, oops, oh, so real quick, I just wanted to talk about the Prop 218. Can we, Wes, can you pick up, oh, give me 1 second, can you pull up OMWD's Prop 218? Okay, so a Prop 218, so I don't know all the legalities of what a Prop 218 is. There's Article 23, all this legal mumbo jumbo that is a requirement. So when you send out a Prop 218 mailer, and here's an example of EWD's mailer that we did last year. I'll hand out an example of OMWD's in a minute. It's not a flowery, between the pipes type newsletter. It's a lot of legal mumbo and jumbo. If you get your SDG&E bill, you'll notice that all the rate increases, it's very boring, dry, mundane information. So this is an example, real quick, of OMWD's Prop 218. The reason why I bring this up is because a lot of the items that are in their Prop 218 are things that we're proposing to include. And I'll just, so again, a lot of it is just the legal mumbo jumbo that you have to include, the basis upon which rates are calculated, the reasons for rate increases, the different types of charges. We talked about the fixed versus variable. Okay, so here's the section on pass-through increases and adjustments. And I'll hand a copy of this out to you in a minute, so you don't have to really read this. But we would have to put something in our Prop 218 about pass-through charges and how they're going to be calculated. That hasn't been totally determined yet, so we'll give the board some options on that. Here's their demand rate reduction, if it's at a 10, 20, and 30. And we talked about our 30, I think was 90 cents, I think was on that other slide for drought rates. Right. OMWD at their 30 is 85. So, and I looked at ours versus OMWD, and it kind of makes sense that we would fall kind of in line. We're within a nickel of them on all of our numbers.
And there's
No, I thought it was,
go ahead.
level 3 is
Well,
1.84.
Yeah, level 3 though is a 20 to 30% decrease. So for theirs, it'd be the 30. The levels don't match the percentage. You'd have to match their percentage with our percentage.
Okay.
So our 30% decrease in demand was 90 cents.
And it's across all
Theirs is
tiers.
across the board also. And again, their study, if you go into the minutia of everything, talked about the same thing that I just mentioned, that it's just so much easier to do it across all units, and that the tier level 3, they actually have 4 tiers, that their 4 tier would basically disappear, so then everyone else kind of falls back downwards. So talks about the proposed rates. Yeah. Oh, and then here's where they do it like a not to exceed. I don't know if I can highlight it. No, I don't think I can highlight it. But anyway, they're not to exceed of 9%. So we can put a cap in there. You want to be careful because I said that they put in a cap of 9%, but one of their charges went up by 14, I believe, the IAC, and they were not able to pass it on the next year. I don't know if it's kind of like our MOU where you can recapture it the following year, but we'd have to be really careful how we word it.
Have we put a cap in place in the past?
We haven't had pass-throughs in the past, so this is new for us.
This will be the first time.
So the way they've worded this, is it on each individual charge? It's 9%?
I think that's the way it was interpreted, that each, or how they worded it, I didn't look specifically, but each line item was capped at 9%. I'll check with legal on this, but we can probably word it that in total, we cap it at X%,
That's
so that
what
way.
I was wondering.
And it would be better if they were bundled, because when, the Water Authority kind of rebundled their rates and the IAC went up 14%, they weren't able to capture that, but overall it didn't go up 14%.
Right.
So when we say we've not had pass-through in the past, we've just not delineated it on our bill. We have passed through the charges.
Yes.
It's part of our rate structure. So what I'm wondering is what's the advantage of putting that we have a cap in writing if we've never done it in the past? What's the advantage?
So it's not an advantage to the district, in this case OMWD, it's just kind of an advantage to give the customer some peace of mind saying, hey, we'll limit it at 9% for you.
Yeah, and if we didn't do pass-throughs, then we'd have to be doing a cost of service study every year, which is expensive, time-consuming, and all the delay, sometimes there's delays in increasing the rate. So the pass-through will help us be more timely on the increase or the passing along of those cost increases by other agencies.
The public awareness of what the pass-through charges are, putting that in writing will prevent us from having to do a cost of service study?
Yeah, the cost of service study it'll be noticed that it's a 5-year, this will cover a 5-year period of time, and in every subsequent year, it'll tell the methodology of how the rate will be increased. So when we have the Prop 218 hearing this year, that'll be the public's opportunity to talk about how they may be affected over the next 4 to 5 years.
Okay, I think we should have more discussion about the value of putting in writing what the cap will be. Because I sort of see it both ways. I mean, if I saw this and I said, whoa, 9%, I get it that there's peace of mind, but still 9%, because it may not be 9%.
Right, well, that's
It may be
kind of-
less.
That's kind of the downside, is that a lot of customers will just automatically assume you're gonna charge the max that you
Right.
can charge.
Right. So the
Right.
wording will
I've
say.
seen that happen before.
Right. The wording will say it'll be the pass-through cost not to exceed 9%. So if it's 3%, it's 3% is what we pass through. But you're right, a lot of customers read it and say, oh, they're gonna go to the max that they can.
That was kind of the disadvantage for agencies in the past, that's why a lot of them didn't do this
Yeah.
pass-through technique, was because of that.
I have this same concern.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, all it takes is one person to misread it and then put it on Facebook, they're gonna increase your rates 9%. And then we have, a lot of misinformation out there
So there
that
will
we
also
also
be,
have to try to mitigate.
so there will also be a cap on the internal costs too. So part of it will say that the pass-through costs are limited to 9%, but then we'll say our costs are limited at like 4 to 5%, depending on what the budget kind of
It
shows.
should be a lower number, I would think.
Right,
Yeah.
so both of those will have caps on them, so if they're reading caps and they point out just the 9% for the pass-through, it's reading one portion that.
And we could probably do a better job. I'll work with Chris about what the increases have been in the past, to say, typically the last 5 years, the San Diego County Water Authority pass-through amount was, I'll make up a number, 4.9%. But still, past performance doesn't necessarily.
Yeah, I think going forward, Metropolitan, what they're looking at, it translates to about that for the water authority, I think in the 4 to 5% range. So I think we'd be pretty safe in doing something like that. I don't know about electricity. I don't know what the percentage increase was this year. It's huge.
My personal home bill was 22% for the tier rate.
Well, they changed the whole time of use too, that's a different subject, but yeah, they changed everything on the time of use.
Yeah. And the other option our board would have is to set the max lower than 9%. Let's say we set it at 6%. If the actual increases were above 6%, we'd either eat it out of reserves or we'd be forced to go back out with another Prop 218, which you could. If we did a 5-year Prop 218 and realized it's not working, we could do another one in 2 years.
Yeah, if there was an extraordinary year
Right.
for the water authority, we could always do a separate one.
Right. So we acknowledge, we've talked about this, that number is gonna resonate. Some people are gonna see the number and assume the worst and think it's gonna be 9% every year.
So real quick, so the pass-through, the drought rates, they do tables again. These are kind of the tables that you saw like we have for tier rates, their drought rates, their fixed charges. Again, most of the stuff is kind of boring and bland. And I believe that's it. Bill examples about what your bill could be, so we would include that as well. And then a section about how to protest the water rates, if you'd like to.
We realize this is a lot of information for a customer to read, but a lot of it's legal requirements, so we have to put it out there. But it's hard to have a layperson read 6 pages of fairly technical information and know how to come to a protest hearing and complain about it.
So does that go to, does does that go to customers or the voters?
So it would go to the customers, so in kind of like a mobile home park, it would go to the one
Right.
customer.
And so the 218 requirement is it has to be over 50%
50% plus one, yeah,
Yeah.
to stop the rate increase.
correct.
You wanna look at the VWD draft?
Has that ever happened anywhere?
I'm not aware of it
I don't
ever
think it's
being
ever
a
happened.
successful challenge. There's some legislation being proposed that would change the way that is, but for
Yeah.
now, that's the rules, so,
Yeah, pretty hard to overcome.
yeah.
Actually, why don't we bring it up real quick? Just haven't shown it a little bit more colorful.
You know, we budgeted 2 hours for this meeting, so can I get just kind of a gut check of where we are in the
I think we're-
I
presentation?
think I'm done unless there's
Okay.
any other questions. I was just gonna show real quick, kind of, but it's a draft, so I don't know if I really wanna show it. It's just our draft, it's got a lot of yellow on it. But just to show you that ours is a little bit more colorful than the OMWD one. So we do have a lot of the same things in there. We have the charts and graphs, which I showed you before. So it's a lot of the legal mumbo jumbo that we need to do, a lot of the charts and graphs. On the front, what we did is, this was a suggestion by a board member last time, is they didn't want the aha moment. So on the front, right on the front, we show what the proposed bill would be.
I remember that discussion.
Yeah, OMWD buries theirs in the back, so the customer, 88% of our typical customers, single-family resident, 5/8 meter. So right in the front, it shows, here's what your bill would be, the $92.42 to $94. So it shows that.
So the rate discussion, the cost of service discussion that we had here, you're ready to do that with the full board soon?
That's where we're heading
So May 12th?
May 10th, 11th, 12th,
Okay, I think
somewhere.
that's alleviated my concern. I wanted to make sure that was done timely along with the budget process, in
Yep.
case there's any concerns.
I support that. Yeah, 100%.
So I think that is my last slide, so unless there's any additional overall questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
I don't have anything else.
I don't either. Thank you for your work on this.
I guess the only thing, in general, I have some comments in the presentation to the board. I would just stress that be clear on what you've assumed for rate increases. In past years, it seemed like I had to kind of pull it out of you. What did you assume and what did you assume for a rate increase and when was that going to take effect?
Well, and it's good, Tom. As we go through the budget process too, we'll show you the revenue requirement that's in the proposed budget and what that would mean as far as a rate increase. So we'll be discussing that to the finance committee and to the board.
Yeah, just in your presentations to the board, I would just stress that you be transparent
Yep.
and show that explicitly what your assumptions are.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, this one is based on the 2022, but as we go through the board workshops, we can show, using the 2023 budget, the revenue requirement, and what that would mean and how it compares to the caps that we're proposing, or the
Yeah.
maxes that we're
I
proposing.
guess I would just stress a couple other things too, just identify any cost-saving measures we've done. I think you're gonna have a director or two ask, well, what have you done to save money? What have you done for us lately? So I know you've done a lot, but others may ask, so I suggest that you do that. And the only other thing is, I think I mentioned earlier, maybe develop a scenario or two that uses reserves and show how that affects the proposed rate increase. I think that question will probably come up too.
I'd like to see a timeline. I think that would be helpful, sort of a timeline of when potentially the drought rates could go into effect if we adopted them, when actually these new rates would go into effect. I think putting that up publicly would be helpful.
Yeah, I think that would, that would follow kind of the timeline that I had on slide 1. So, and the drought rates would follow the same timeline here.
It's not being shared.
Oh, sorry.
So-
Public hearing would be on July 6th, so the rates would be effective following this timeline. Oh, here we go. On, the first week of July.
And one other thing, if we actually, if drought rates are approved or adopted or approved by the board, they're not necessarily going to go into effect. I think it's level 2 is up to the GM's discretion. After that, everything.
The board's discretion for level 2.
So at 2 and above is all the board's discretion. So even though we have the rates established in the ordinance, doesn't necessarily mean they'll go into effect until the board actually says we're going to drought level. So it'd be up to the board.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
the state can mandate that we go to level 2, but they don't want to mandate how you charge for your services, so that's up to us.
Right, and the drought rate also would be kind of the maximum that you could charge. So if it was 90 cents and the board said, you know, hey, we want to take some of it from reserves, let's do 60 cents, we could do that too. It would all be board approved. And also with the 5-year Prop 218, just because we don't have to do a Prop 218 every year, we'd still have to come to the board in October, November to do for the board to approve the rates for the next year.
Yeah. It's not a majority protest hearing, but it is a board meeting that the rates have to be set.
Okay. All right.
1 o'clock.
101.
No, I'm looking at that one.
All right, well, thank you very much. It's a lot of
Thank you.
great information.
Officially adjourned.
We're adjourned.